This winter, our theme is sacred dialogue, interpreting and embodying sacred texts across traditions. Today's lecture on creation and chaos in Hindu sacred texts will be delivered by Professor Ravi Gupta from the College of William and Mary, and it's my personal pleasure to welcome you. But to introduce our speaker, I'd like to call upon Dr. Gary Macy, who is the chair of the Religious Studies Department here at Santa Clara.
I was very excited when I was asked to introduce Dr. Gupta for a couple of reasons, and one of them is very personal, and that is that my brother and my sister-in-law are always bragging to me about the famous people that they've met and had a chance to introduce. My brother-in-law was cultural attaché in India for many years, and my sister-in-law was the editor of the Sunday edition of the Times of India. And this time, I get to tell them about a famous person that I got to interview. So our speaker tonight is one of the great scholars of Hindu scripture, and we're talking about scripture here. But I can tell you more than that, because you might say, yes. And where in India does Dr. Gupta come from? Not at all. He is a Western boy. He's from Boise, so he's back home, and he's very happy about that. In fact, Dr. Gupta graduated with a BA in philosophy and a BS in mathematics in 1999 at the age of 17 from Boise State. Isn't that amazing? And then, at 17, he entered the University of Oxford. One of the youngest people ever to be accepted at Oxford, and by 22 had finished his doctorate. An astonishing accomplishment. So we have before us a very brilliant and interesting lecturer. Now I say interesting lecturer because you might say to yourself, well, if he's that brilliant, he must be boring. Not at all. This is a gentleman who's already won a teaching award at William and Mary College and the Alumni Fellowship Award. So his own students think he's a very, very good teacher.
I want to begin by asking your help in just unpacking this brief statement a little bit. It's very brief, and yet it's had such a powerful effect on Hindu traditions for the past 2,000 years. In a statement like this, what kind of assumptions about the nature of reality and the nature of creation are embedded in the passage? The passage is not making an argument here, at least the part that I've quoted, right? But it does carry some important assumptions about the way creation works. So tell me, what assumptions do you see? Some of them are not very difficult to find. Let's read it together once more, and then I'll ask you for your input here. In the beginning, this world was simply what is existent, one only, without a second. And it thought to itself, let me become many, let me propagate myself. So, what's it saying? Can I have some suggestions from people? Yes?
It suggests intent.
Good. So behind creation, there's intent or intentionality. It's not a random occurrence. Indeed, one of the most important words pointed out by legions of commentators over the centuries has been this word here, and it thought, right? Tad aikshata, which is a word that means both thinking and seeing, as in thinking and perceiving what you think. So there's a second assumption that's embedded in that, which is not immediately apparent, that when this original reality thinks of something, it is true, it becomes reality. This is called in Sanskrit satya sankalpa, or the very desire of God makes something real. We live in a world where everything is measurable, everything is quantified. This is the great drive of our times, the production and management of data. You can measure anything, and to make any kind of decision, you need data to go along with it. There are companies, this is Silicon Valley, you know this much better than I do. But there are companies that just function on this basis, collecting information, measuring that data, and then putting it to good use. That is obviously essential. It's crucial for the process of creation. It's all those ingredients we talked about. And yet what these texts ask us for is that make sure there's a place in your life where you go to, something you do which cannot be measured, which cannot be quantified in any reasonable way, for which you have nothing to show anyone. How productive were you in that hour? I didn't produce anything. It's not a creative state. It's not a creative state. Because ultimately, only the uncreated can be undying. Ultimately, without that, things will always remain self-centered. Because that's one of the ingredients of creation, remember? Is the I, is the self. So for things not to be self-centered, if we want to find a place of flawlessness, because creation is always flawed, whether it's morally or physically, we need to find a place of uncreated existence. And this is what yoga is about. This is what yoga is about. Yoga is defined in the Gita and other texts, for example, as samyatvam, which means equilibrium, which in this context refers to the state before creation. That's the yogi's goal, is, metaphorically speaking, in essence, to return to the uncreated equilibrium, samyatvam, the state of equanimity, of steadiness. And that's what yoga is about, which is a whole other topic in and of itself. Just like the gentleman here in the front audience was saying, when? What period of history? What are we talking about? Right? Let's make it specific so we know exactly who, what, when, where we're talking about. Secondly, let me do it with people who know what they're talking about. And then I have the tools necessary to place it next to something else from the Hindu traditions and do a cross-reading, a comparison, and benefit from it both ways. And that's sort of one of my guiding principles in terms of doing cross-cultural reading. Yes, in the far back.
My question, Evax, on that, in Hinduism, who's in charge of the text? An oversimplification would be that in Judaism, the people of Israel and the rabbis are in charge of the text. In Christianity, the church is in charge of the text. Who's in charge of it? Who decided that these were important texts as opposed to other stories?
Okay, that's a really good question. The question is, in Hinduism, who's in charge of the text? In other traditions, there might be a church in charge of the text, or a community of people who are particularly charged with interpreting, preserving, transmitting the text. Who is it in Hinduism? That's, in fact, it's a very pertinent question today amongst the Hindu community here in the United States, but also all over the world. And the question reframed might be stated as, who speaks for Hinduism? I could particularize it and say, who speaks for these texts, these sacred texts that I'm talking about? Who defines them? Who interprets them? Who decides what they're actually saying? And there's no clear answer to that question, either now or historically. And the reason for that is because Hinduism as a tradition has lacked many of the structural aspects that we might expect in a religious tradition, such as a common ecclesiastical authority or some body of people that particularly say, okay, geographically speaking, it's India. Right? Geographically speaking, it's the people of India. But that's a huge body of people, right? And these texts in particular have been preserved and conveyed by Brahmins. Brahmins tend to be the priestly class in the Hindu caste system. Now, that specifies it a little bit more, as in the texts were clearly written by Brahmins, who were basically educated, conversant in Sanskrit, which was the language of the cultured and the elite and the educated. They were priests, they were teachers, they were ministers to kings and the royal order. They were also responsible a lot for transmitting these teachings to a general public, who in historical periods would not have access to these texts because of language and literacy barriers. So in that sense, I could specify it as a community of people who are Brahmins or priests. But then again, that community is, I mean, it's so disparate, it's so diverse from North India to South India, and there are so many internal divisions that ownership of a particular text is not a question that's easily answered. And this is why dialogue with Hinduism has its own specific particular challenges. It's so difficult, especially in our world where we live in a world of spokespersons, right? Everything has a spokesperson. Everyone has a spokesperson. So you're looking to create a dialogue. We need a Hindu representative on the table. Who do you ask for? When I met the Pope, I was asked to represent Hindus in America. How? Why would I do that? You know, I'm not even a Brahmin by birth, as in. So who do you invite to the table for interreligious dialogue? And the happy thing is, every Hindu is willing to speak for Hinduism. And that's also the problem.